Hi everyone, this is part 2 to your pumpkin with a fall Zentangle background. Before we get started, I just want to say if you do have watercolors, you need to make sure that this paper isn't printer paper. You want to make sure that this paper is art paper, specifically able to handle watercolors. If you have watercolors, you may have tested watercolors on paper before and realized that sometimes it makes the paper buckle or it can ruin the paper. So you want to make sure you have the right paper for the job. So if you used printer paper or you used paper that is not good for watercolors, then I advise you to use crayons or markers for the rest of your project. So before we get started doing watercolors, we're going to use crayons first. So if you do decide to use your watercolors, you want to use crayons or oil pastels, but you most likely have crayons at home. These crayons, when we color with them, after you're finished with your design coloring it in, you can use watercolors over top of it for the background of your Zentangles, and it will resist the crayon. It won't mix with it or blend with it. It will resist it. So for color combinations, I want you to think about fall color combinations. If I color in this pie orange, like a pumpkin pie, and then the crust I color in like a light brown, the background of it should not be something that is similar. Or if you want to go with a similar color for the background, you want the color to be either darker or lighter than the object you colored in. You can pick fall colors for this, or maybe there's another color that you would rather choose for something. For mine, when I did the mums, I picked yellow because I thought the background would stand out a lot, because these colors can contrast one another. Yellow is a bit of a lighter color, red is a darker color. Remember, like I said, you can use markers as well. So to make this stand out more, I didn't use red crayon, I used red marker. And for the candy corns, I colored them in with marker and then the background lightly with purple. It really is up to you on the way that you want to color in your pumpkin Zentangle drawing. Before we start our backgrounds though, I'm going to show you how I personally will color in the pumpkin and use watercolors. So what I'm first going to do is, for mine, I'm going to use my crayons on my pumpkin first, and then I'm going to use watercolor later. And remember, you can color in your pumpkin with whatever you choose. What I do want you to understand first though, is that if you decide to color in your pumpkin or your designs with marker, and then you also decide to do it mixed media meaning I would use marker, crayon, and I would use watercolors. The problem you're going to run into with watercolors is if you color too closely with marker next to your watercolors, you're going to have them seep into one another. And what I mean, if you add water to your marker, it will make it into a watercolor as such. So I don't recommend you using both markers and watercolors in your picture. I want you to pick one. So if you have crayons and you want to do a watercolor resist, use your crayons with your watercolors. If you have crayons and markers, you can use both crayons and markers. If you have the option of having a paintbrush and water, you can also make watercolors using your markers. But I really prefer you not to use markers and watercolors together because it can run. So moving on to our project, I'm going to start by coloring in my designs with crayon, and I'm going to leave the background of them blank. I'm going to start with my pumpkin first. I'm going to color in the stem of my pumpkin. I don't want to use watercolors on my pumpkin stem personally, but you can do that if you so choose to. So I'm just coloring it in brown. And the more wax of the crayon that you have, the more that it's going to resist the watercolor. If you have white spots left in your crayon design, then you're going to have some of the watercolor get stuck in it. So I'm going to outline my segments with a darker orange color. I just think that this can make it kind of interesting. It gives it a little bit more dimension. And you don't have to do this part either. Maybe you'd prefer to use a different color orange on it, or you don't want to add the crayon lines at all. It's up to you. So now I've outlined my pumpkin, and I'm going to put some water in my orange to activate it. And remember that the more water that you add, the lighter color you're going to get from your watercolor if you're using watercolor. So I have a much lighter orange on my paper than I would get if I used less water. See, now I have a little bit of a darker orange. And it's darker and darker the more water is taken out of it. And be careful when you are painting in your sections that you are painting within the pumpkin, so you don't get any of the watercolor or marker or crayon in other sections. Be very neat with your project. And if you do get it in other sections, it's okay, because you can color over top watercolors with crayons. And now my pumpkin is all filled in. I did the pumpkin part first because it takes a little bit of time for it to dry. So I'm going to let my pumpkin dry, and then we will start on our background. Our pumpkin is now dry, so we're going to move on to the next step. So I'm going to color in my designs, like my mugs and my apples, my sunflowers, and my donuts, leaves, and mums, and the pie, of course. I'm going to color those in with crayon. And in the background, I'm going to use my watercolors. So I'll show you how to do that, and then I'm going to set you off to do it on your own and show you what I have when I'm done. So I'm gonna decide that maybe I want my mugs to be blue. So I'm going to color in my mugs and make sure that I color in with the crayon or the oil pastel hard enough, because we want to make sure that the watercolor resists the wax in the crayon. I'm going to color in the middle of them brown, very lightly, like it's a tea or a hot chocolate. And then I'm going to decide what color I want to do. So I'm going to pick a contrasting color for this one. When I do the pumpkins though, I want to make sure that my background doesn't really blend in with my pumpkin. So I'm going to use red. I would want to use orange for this personally, but I'm going to use red for this one. I'm going to color it in. And another way that you can do this, which I'll show you very lightly, is that you can take your red crayon and you can use it almost in a way that we would use a watercolor, because a watercolor is a lot lighter than a crayon, as you can see with the pumpkin. So if you very, very lightly color in your background, with red, it'll keep those cups standing out. They will be more emphasized than the background of red. I'm going to color in very, very lightly this background with red, and then I'm going to do watercolor over it too. Now when you're doing with watercolors, you don't have to add the background in crayon like that, like I just showed you. It's not necessary. But you can see how the red in the background of this is resisting the blue of the cups. I'm going right over the blue and it's not filling it in. It is, however, filling in the background. And what you can do, because there's a little bit of water that's stuck on my cups, I'm going to take a tissue or a napkin and just dab very, very lightly at the cups to get some of that off. You can also dab it at the background if you want it to be a lighter color. Sometimes it can make some cool designs when you lift some of your watercolor up, which is what I'm doing. This is lifting it up. And there you go. So that's something I'm going to do with all of it. And a trick that you can do so that your watercolor doesn't run and you can continue to work is that I'm going to color every other one of these in, and then I'm going to use watercolor on top. And by the time that you get back to the beginning, you should be able to have something that's dry enough to work on the next one with watercolor, if you are working on it with watercolor. And like I said before, don't have to. You can use crayon or marker. I will speed ahead for the end of the project. We can see what we've done. Alright, and that is our finished project. Remember to think about your color combinations in the background. Maybe try to stick to colors that are a little bit away from orange when they touch so that they don't blend in. So I hope you had a good time creating this with me, and remember to send this to Mrs. O's email. Alright? Hope you had a great time. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.